Welcome to the October 11th, 2022 regular meeting of the Policy and Services Committee. Can the clerk call the roll, please?
Councilmember Stone?
Here.
Councilmember Cormack?
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka is absent. We have a quorum with 2 present. Thank you.
Great, thank you. First on the agenda is oral communications. For anyone in the public that'd like to speak to anything that's not on the agenda, you have 3 minutes. And first we have Cheryl Spencer. Welcome.
Here comes Mr. Tanaka. Good evening, councillors. I'm Cheryl Spencer, a longtime resident of Palo Alto and the coordinator of the Palo Alto branch of the Cities for CEDAW Coalition. I have put a printed copy of my remarks on your desks, councillors. CEDAW stands for the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And our coalition has been advocating for a city ordinance based on the principles of this long-standing United Nations Convention since February 2018. In November 2020, the City Council gave city staff 17 assignments pertaining to the city's race and equity efforts. The work assignment that directed staff in coordination with the city's overall diversity and inclusion efforts to conduct a workforce demographic assessment as baseline information and to pursue an employee assessment to measure city workforce culture is one of the 3 assignments not yet completed. But staff continues to work on this assignment, so says tonight's agenda. And the agenda also says that the staff continues to work on a citywide climate survey, which is anticipated to be distributed this year. Carrying out such assessments are the first steps in the process of writing an ordinance based on CEDAW, and we are pleased to learn that they are being worked on. We have coalition members who could help with the development of these assessments if that would get them done sooner. We are pleased to read the motion passed at your last meeting that you recommend the City Council consider adopting a values statement, and that the 3rd value listed says, quote, "We will integrate equity into our decisions, considering how decisions affect people differently based on their identity or circumstances," end quote. An ordinance based on CEDAW will help the city integrate equity as it relates to girls and women in their decisions. We look forward to hearing about progress on a CEDAW ordinance in the near future. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Next is Jennifer Landesman.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. I'm following up on Council's August study session on airplane noise. It had a brief mention at the end that a city protocol is being followed, which refers, I believe, to how the city handles FAA changes that can negatively impact Palo Alto. I sent an email to you, your committee today, requesting for you to please review and update the community on which protocol the city manager was referring to, because it does not square with the protocol that council voted on about this topic. And this was not addressed during the study session. This left a lot of community members kind of confused because it's unclear what the city is doing. There's a lot of information or a lot of talk about GBAS, and I also included in my email to address that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No more public speakers. We'll move on to our first action item, which is to receive an update from the city's federal and state legislative advocates and discussion and recommendation on the 2023 citywide legislative guidelines. Does staff have a presentation prepared? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Stone, members of the Policy and Services Committee, Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. This evening, we have the federal and state legislative updates, as well as the legislative guidelines. We typically bring the legislative guidelines in November or December. Since they were at a point where we felt comfortable bringing it to the committee, we're bringing them a little bit earlier this year so that your next couple meetings, we can balance out some of the remainder of items that we have for this committee. So with that, I will click through. We will have our federal update first, then our state update. I'll briefly go over the 2023 legislative guidelines. There are not very many changes between this current year and the proposed. Then we will get to the tentative 2023 legislative work plan. I'll explain that a little more when we get there, and then our recommendation at the end. So for the federal update, you can just pause the presentation for a moment. We have Mr. Steve Palmer from Van Scoyoc, who will give that update. And you can minimize the presentation and then we'll come back to it for the state update. Steve?
Thank you, Chantel, and thank you, members of the committee. We're happy to be here today. My name is Steve Palmer, Vice President with Van Scoyoc Associates, and David Haynes, Associate Vice President, will join me. I'll kick things off and turn it over to him. We'd like to quickly give you a summary of where things are heading into the election and the lame duck session following the election this year, and then give you a forecast of some of the major issues that will affect the city that Congress will be dealing with next year. First of all, just to remind you, it's not just David and I. We have the entire team at Van Scoyoc Associates of about 60 people that continue to work on behalf of the city. David and I call upon those people as we need their additional help in areas of science, defense, anything, environment, anything that we don't feel we have necessarily the relationships with members of Congress or the agencies, and we all join in to help advocate for the city. What I'd like to do is kind of touch on three different issues that are sort of dominating this year's Congress before David talks about next year. And certainly the one you know most about is the bipartisan infrastructure law. We've talked about that previously in terms of how the federal agencies are working to implement this 5-year, $1.2 trillion bill, which is a massive undertaking, trying to make sure there's investment in roads, bridges, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, rail grade separation, water, airports, broadband, other areas important to the city. We've been working, David and I have been working with staff, trying to make sure that they understand what the federal agencies and the congressional committees are proposing in terms of these programs and how we can best help the city position it for these competitive grant applications. There are the significant number of competitive grant programs. We know that bridge replacement, rail grade crossing, and road safety, for example, are critically important to the city. We've been working with staff in terms of trying to help advance the information in terms of how you can best compete for those kinds of grants. There are also formula funding that is coming out through this infrastructure bill. Last year, the city of airport received $159,000 through the Federal Aviation Airport Grant Program. You may have seen yesterday, in fact, the Federal Highway Administration released the announced $60 billion to various states. California, Caltrans is actually going to receive the largest amount of money, and all of that money will then work through the process from Caltrans to the city and MTC. There are other areas as well that are of interest that we haven't talked about so much, but there's $1 billion that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, announced recently for cybersecurity. Now that money will go to the state, and local governments will apply to the state for that funding, but it's set up that way, so it's not something the state can spend all of that money, but it's intended to help the city and others address the various cyber vulnerabilities. A second bill I'd like to touch on that's still being developed in terms of the final implementation guidelines is the Inflation Reduction Act. You may recall this was the Build Back Better Act that got significantly reduced down into a smaller bill, but it still is a landmark climate bill that passed the Congress and was signed into law in August. It's intended, among many things, to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by the year 2030. And it does that through tax credits, through investment, and investing in clean energy, electric vehicles, and environmental justice. Some of the opportunities of interest for the city are there's $1 billion program that EPA is running for clean heavy-duty vehicles, such as garbage trucks and other vehicles that the city can apply for. The Federal Highway Administration has a $3 billion neighborhood access program that will be is yet to be defined by the federal agencies. They also have a $2 billion program that will provide incentives to use materials that have lower carbon emissions. Of course, there's the tax credit for electric vehicles, and there's an extension of tax credits for solar power, which is intended to help ensure that there's rooftop solar and standalone energy storage. The last bill I'd like to talk about is the annual appropriations bill. You won't be surprised that while the fiscal year started on October 1st, 11 days ago, there is still not a final bill. Congress failed to reach an agreement. They finally passed a continuing resolution that keeps the government funded through December 16th, but they need to resolve the final funding levels for the various agencies hopefully by December 16th, so that they can have a full year appropriations bill. Some, especially the Republicans, would like to see the final bill enacted next year when they hope they're going to be in charge of the House and the Senate. But I think many people are beginning to focus on the fact that it's best to try to finalize this in December. Of course, you know that earmarks are a part of the process now. They have been the last 2 years. Democrats brought those back. We're not sure the Republicans will be there. We know that, you're well aware the city received a $2 million earmark from Congresswoman Eshoo for the Cahoots project last year, but we're not 100% sure that Republicans will continue it. We're hopeful because it's an opportunity for the city to be able to compete for funds on a different level. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and he can talk about some of the legislative issues that Congress will be dealing with next year.
Thanks, Steve, and great to be with you, Chair and council members. Looking at next year, I want to touch on a few issues that could come up and be opportunities for advocacy for the city. An opportunity for advocacy next year could be on the Federal Aviation Administration's authorization. Current authorization for FAA expires at the end of the fiscal year next year. So in September 30th, I think Congress will be working to reauthorize the FAA during the next year. And hearings actually on FAA have already started. So the FAA authorization includes authorization programs for programs such as the airport improvement programs for airport infrastructure, runways, and other needs, as well as kind of across the board aviation and airport noise, airport issues as well. Another issue that is going to be coming up is the current authorization for an array of food and agriculture programs under the Farm Bill. So you don't necessarily think of the Farm Bill right away, but that's going to include programs around everything from farmers markets as well as local pesticide regulations. That would be in addition to the traditional agriculture programs that are in there. On another issue, law enforcement and criminal justice reform will not be going away as an issue that is discussed and considered. And Democrats will continue to specifically pursue police reform. But most efforts ultimately on police reform and criminal justice reform are going to come out of the administration. So efforts on police reform have failed ultimately to find broad support in the House and Senate, even with the House passing several bills on law enforcement reform. Everything from qualified immunity issues or use of force or new grant programs for mental health professionals. But as of right now and this year, the Senate does not plan to consider those bills. Most recently, there is continued tension about tying law enforcement reform to any kind of additional funding for law enforcement hiring or other sources of funding. So lastly, on the law enforcement and criminal justice reform, many of you have heard in the last week that the president issued pardons for those with federal convictions of simple possession of marijuana. President Biden also called on state changes for simple possession offenses. The House has tried to move on this issue in the past, but the Senate has not taken up that issue. So there will be continued opportunity on police and criminal justice reform. And then lastly, just wanted to quickly touch on potential affordable housing reform. And affordable housing support and reform issues could certainly come up next year. First of all, even sooner than next year in the lame duck, there'll be tax extender issues that are considered, and one of those is the low-income housing tax credit, and that's the primary source of financing for the construction and preservation of affordable housing. But beyond that, Democrats also want to expand public housing support, affordable housing measures, and so there could be opportunities within to improve and expand affordable housing, and both from the administration, which they will certainly be pushing for changes and advancements there, but also in the Congress as well. So with that said, there are going to be other issues that come up, like PFAS, for example, the forever chemical, and other issues that we're happy to discuss with you. But thank you again for this opportunity to join you tonight, and we appreciate the partnership with the city.
Thank you. And to the chair, would you like to pause and have a discussion on the federal legislation before going to state? I know it's going to be a lot to digest if we go straight through.
Yeah, we can pause for council questions. Let's first, though, then move to see if there's anyone in the public that wants to talk on this issue.
Hi, should I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Steve and David, for your update. I just wanted to pass along that the hearings that have been happening at the Aviation Subcommittee have been very disappointing because they are the routine asks for funding for aviation commerce or airport capacity. And they've at many points just been flat out misleading about the problems of noise. From what you mentioned, the bills or what's on the table are all about aid to airports, airport improvement, and so forth. If as you know, I've been looking at this for 8 years and been listening to your updates, David, and Steve. And my view is that the way the air traffic organization is, they're handling a lot of the environmental work that we need. And there is a clear conflict of interest at that organization. A lot of people say that the FAA has a dual mission, which is safety and promoting commerce. That's not true. As you probably know, that was taken away from them in 1996 with the 1996 reauthorization. Their sole mission is supposed to be safety, and they're kind of fudging it with the air traffic organization, which is supposed to be about operational efficiency, which I would say they have not demonstrated on a lot of fronts in terms of being efficient at running the operation. NextGen itself is a bit of a very flawed implementation that was done, and there have been all of these conflicts and problems with the Boeing Max and everything. So we're not safe in that environment, actually. And I don't know, maybe are there people thinking outside the box about how to actually reorganize the FAA organization so that anything that's about promoting aviation, my understanding from the 1996 reauthorization is that It's supposed to be at the Department of Transportation level. And so I think there's a lot of problems with that. And yeah, I hope that maybe there's going to be there's going to be better information before 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Landesman. All right, then we'll return to council for questions and discussion on the federal issues. Go ahead, Councilmember Cormack.
Thanks so much, Chair Stone. Good evening, and thanks for staying up with us, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Haynes. With respect to your presentation, I'm not sure there was much of it in there that was news. I think most of that's been, in the public eye. I've seen most of that information. Could you be more specific about the competitive grants and the formula funding from the infrastructure bill and how exactly you're working with staff? I'd just like a little bit more information on that.
Sure, Council Member, I'd be happy to start, and David, jump in if I miss anything. Obviously, there are a number of new programs and a number of existing programs that were created by the bipartisan infrastructure law. The existing programs, I think we try to make sure that when the notices of funding opportunities come out, that staff is aware of them. We try to highlight any of the changes that the agencies are proposing as a result of those. But for the new programs, we're trying to dive into the agencies, the Department of Transportation, EPA, Department of Commerce, and understand as quickly as we can what they're going to be asking for. Because the bill itself, the statutory language, as you might probably are aware, is relatively vague and doesn't provide a lot of guidance. So we're trying to get as much information as possible from the agency, share that with staff. But when it comes right down to it, honestly, Council Member, the city has to apply for a competitive grant, and we can help shape that grant, and then build political support for it with the Congresswoman Eshoo and the 2 senators. But it really is contingent on identifying a good project and trying to define that in terms of the confines of what the new programs are about.
Okay, let me just say on anything that's climate related, I would hope that we are being proactive and not reactive. I hope that the staff is working, with you closely to help the different departments figure out that, because we actually are a little bit ahead of the game on some of that area. So, okay, that's great. And Mr. Haynes, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thanks. I think forecasting as well on what is going to be coming out, because there are so many sources of funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, being able to discuss with staff ahead of time, I think has also been helpful of the various priorities within the bill, and knowing a lot of those priorities, being able to identify those sources of funding before they're coming out has been something we've also attempted and been doing with staff.
Well, hopefully you have a big old master spreadsheet. Yes.
To
Deputy
that point,
Cotton Gaines wants to add in.
thank you. To the point of a master spreadsheet, we actually, because the city is applying for more grants than has historically been the case, or at least in recent history. So we are building more of an ecosystem amongst our state, federal advocates, as well as having California Consulting right now working with us. And their focus is to help us apply for grants and do a lot better with grant compliance, because once we get the funding, it's a lot of work that we have to do to make sure we're doing what we said we would do. So the Administrative Services Department has taken the lead to hold that master spreadsheet and working with California Consulting. So between Mr. Palmer and Mr. Haynes and California Consulting, we're all trying to make sure we know what the grants are, know what the requirements are, and then set ourselves up for success in applications and doing the work on the other end.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thanks for the comprehensive answer. So there are 3 things you didn't touch on in your presentation that I'd like to briefly talk about. The first is basically everything related to money, inflation and interest rates, because if I think about what's really affecting us here, the rate of inflation is affecting us, and certainly interest rates is affecting, will continue to affect us going forward. The second will be water. So how the federal water policy interacts with California water policy, it's certainly relevant to us here with our water supply. And then the third would be just understanding, I hesitate to say that we're post-COVID, but we're certainly in a new environment. And a number of years ago, when I was first on council, I know that council members actually came, to Washington, D.C. and lobbied in person and came to conferences. So those three things I'm interested in. And do we get 10 minutes? I notice. Oh, that's exciting. Great. Got 6 minutes left. Fantastic. So the first would be, inflation and interest rates. Is there anything, aside from what we read in the papers, that we should know from the DC end? Is there anything we should be doing from this end to advocate for this? It's really a big issue in terms of wages in particular, which is the biggest component of our budget. And capital infrastructure are huge projects for us. And so, the interest rates at which we may need to borrow, are relevant. So thoughts on interest and inflation?
So I think, council member, inflation and interest rates really are not issues that Congress can easily tackle. As you know, the Federal Reserve really has control over the interest rates. Obviously, we expect, like you have read, that there's going to be another significant increase in interest rates next month in November. They are working diligently to try to get inflation under control. How that affects the economy is yet to be determined. I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that. I do think there is a significant concern, though, that inflation is eating into the infrastructure bill, that the amount of money that actually will flow to communities through these grants is not as much as it appeared to be because of inflation reducing the overall federal share of that funding and the cost of the goods and services that are intended to be acquired. It's something that Congress hopefully can address, but I don't think there's any consensus in terms of how. It took many years, if not decades, to get an infrastructure bill passed. I don't know if Congress is really equipped to be able to say, on top of that $1.2 trillion, we're going to add more money because inflation is reducing the buying power of that funding.
Yeah, and I should have added to the premise of my question. What is the budget deficit this year? What is the debt service? Because I appreciate your answer, but to be fair, to the extent that the federal government, engages in deficit spending, which it has and is now at completely unheard of levels, it's not unreasonable to assume that would have an effect.
You're absolutely right. And the interest costs, because of the rising interest rates, the amount of money the federal government has to pay towards the interest on the debt is significantly going to increase. I don't know the amount of money overall, what the federal debt is this year. I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe I heard the other day that we reached $21 trillion in terms of the overall debt.
I mean, it's unimaginable if you think about it. I guess I would just caution for all of us, as exciting as it is to be, getting money from the federal government, it's not free. It comes from all of us and it may have other consequences. Okay, well, I just wanted to flag that as an issue that's, beyond just what we can get from these bills. Any update on federal water policy and how that interacts with California and hydropower? Anything on that's important for us?
Well, let me start. David may have a better answer. Certainly, there are a couple things that are happening on water policy. The Supreme Court, you may be aware, is agreed to listen. They had oral arguments already on the waters of the U.S. Rulemaking that EPA has initiated, that has gone back and forth in the courts from the Obama administration to the Trump administration and now the Biden administration. That is an issue that deals with waters adjacent to other properties that the federal government, whether they can regulate or not. In terms of the Colorado River issue, the water flow issue, that is not something Congress has really gotten into. I don't think there's, I do think there's an interest in by the Bureau of Land Management to try to help negotiate some sort of a new agreement, but I don't think there's anything that's on the horizon that is going to supersede what the states are trying to do in terms of their work right now.
Okay. It's just another one that's important to us in terms of the interaction with the state and federal water projects and the Central Valley, et cetera. Okay. So, and then finally, what are your thoughts on, we try to do a legislative day each year up in Sacramento. What are your thoughts on the, value and importance of having council members from Palo Alto come on out to DC and chat with staff and potentially representatives and yourselves and maybe meet with some of the agencies we've been discussing?
I think it's critically important. I know, council member, you worked in DC at one point earlier in your career, and I think you appreciate better than many how important it is to have local people from Washington come. You can talk to Congresswoman Eshoo at any point in time, but it's only in Washington where you get to finally talk about the legislative issues that are important to the city, the funding issues, where she and her staff can understand how important they are. And then to carry that message, as you alluded to the agencies and other committees of jurisdiction, I think really is important. And I think David and I strongly encourage council members to come over the next several months and years to come back to Washington. There is a huge benefit to that.
Okay, well, I'll just, tender that to staff and the chair and, to the extent, I think that should be a coordinated effort, not one that we do individually. Again, thanks so much for being here. I know it's late your time and we appreciate the work that you're doing for us.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. Councilmember Tanaka?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely share my fellow councilperson's concern about money printing and impact on inflation. It's in our record deficit, not a good situation. So we should definitely push back on that. One question I have for you guys is, I know for a long time there's been this issue with SALT. The fact that if you're in a blue state which has a fairly high tax rate, you get kind of unfairly punished because you have I think a 10K cap. And I recently saw that it looks like the Democrats have stopped their push on this. And I was wondering if you could talk about where that's at. And because I think, blue states, especially like California, especially areas like Palo Alto, where we're paying extraordinary amount of taxes, this is a really big deal. So can you guys give us an update on that? And where does our current congressperson sit on that issue?
Congressman, thanks, or excuse me, council member, thanks for that question. Councilman Tanaka, the issue came to a head earlier this year, and it ultimately had to be pulled out of legislation this summer because you explained it exactly. There wasn't comprehensive agreement on the issue, and in order to be able to get the votes needed, as well as on the funding levels and on the budget needed, needed to be pulled out. So it's going to continue to be a numbers game, as well as they're going to have to find congressional leadership is going to have to find an effective offset to be able to bring it back. And those are going to be the two challenges that continue. But because it does impact California significantly, impacts New York significantly, both blue states and blue areas, it's going to be a continued challenge and debate. With that said, the issue has not been given up on. Most of the, including the city's delegation, but most Democrats will support changes there. But getting to the numbers in the Senate are going to continue to be a challenge, particularly this year, to be able to pass any kind of SALT reform.
So what was our congressperson's position on SALT?
She would like to see it change, and she would like to see it come re-implemented in the way it was before. And she voted to repeal it? Did she vote to repeal SALT previously?
In the last, I guess it was last August.
Are you talking about pulling it out of the? She supported bringing back the tax deduction. I think that's what your ultimate question is.
Okay. Okay. So where is it falling short right now? Because I thought the Democrats kind of control the houses and the presidency right now, right?
They do. Both houses, as as we all know, as well as the White House. Unfortunately, from the procedural side, to move anything in the Senate, there must be Republican support, at least to a limited degree. And so there was not enough support, both from the Republican side as ultimately to be able to include the SALT reform in there.
And council member, there was, to be clear, there is not unanimity among Senate Democrats that the SALT cap should be changed. So they could have done it as a part of the reconciliation bill, which would require just 51 votes. But there were a handful of senators that said they didn't want to support that.
Okay, that's unfortunate because it's incredibly unfair. Okay, and we're seeing this big issue with Ukraine, and we're coming up to winter, and the energy prices are spiking. We saw some of our own local gas price. I saw one place hit $8. It's incredible, right? In terms of the price of fuel. The one solution that I think could really help is nuclear power. It's carbon free. Less than 100 people have died from it since the beginning of time of when nuclear started, including Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, all those different disasters. And so where we are in terms of really trying to promote kind of like a one true carbon free source that works at night. What's the federal government doing in that area?
Go ahead, David.
From the nuclear front, I can say Congress would like to pass support measures for advanced nuclear reactors. I think up until about 2010 or 11, when I was a congressional staff member, there was wide support for additional nuclear reactors. That support waned over the last 10 years, but there has been, over the last few years, there has been an effort to provide funding or some form of other support specifically for new forms, advanced forms of nuclear reactors. That has not fully come to fruition yet, but that is something that is a growing interest in Congress.
What about 2373, the bill in the Senate? Is from last July. Where is that at right now?
Councilmember, if you could provide additional information, we'd be happy to talk about that in the future.
It's basically a bill to try to reestablish. So at one point in time, the United States used to be #1 in nuclear power, but we put a hold on this for many decades, and so you have places like France where 90% of the energy is provided by nuclear power, and they have very low carbon output right now. Versus us, we have only about 20% with nuclear power. So if you Google 2373, it'll pop right up for you, and you can take a look at it. I was just wondering, it doesn't sound like you know much about it.
Councilmember, I advised the Center on Nuclear Energy for several years. This specific bill has not been on our radar, but we were happy to look into that bill, and we're happy to, at the council's discretion, advocate or do other work on the bill.
Okay. You heard the prior speaker talk about airplane noise, and this has been a problem in our community for a long time. So what have we done actively to try to sway the FAA on this issue? Because it seems like it's definitely executive branch, it's Democratic in power. Because I know that at one point a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, when I visited the FAA, they were talking about starting a program at Boston Logan Airport, where they would actually spread the airplanes out a little bit, so it's not all over the same area, and so it would deafen the noise a bit. Do we know whatever happened to that? Because they would think about piloting it at Logan and then maybe trying it at maybe SFO or San Jose or something like that. But I never heard anything else. Heard anything since then.
Yeah, we can, council member, we can check into that. Do you know the name of the program that they were talking about with you?
Let me look it up. Give me a second here.
In terms of, obviously the FAA is going to continue down the path of what they are trying to do. They've done a very good job in terms of expanding the community engagement in terms of, but they are obviously reticent to try to undertake any kind of significant changes to the plan that's been implemented for the Bay Area, only because they know that would open it up to other changes and any kind of legal challenges.
So this was back in 2020, March in 2020. I can't remember if anyone from your guys' firm attended with us, but it was us, Cupertino, a few other Bay Area cities. And the person that we met with was Kevin Walsh. Kevin was the, let's see, what was his title?
Yeah, I was actually at that meeting with you.
Okay, yeah. So you remember that, right? So whatever happened to that?
Obviously, we don't represent Boston Logan Airport, so I don't know what specifically happened with it. We can try to find out for you, though.
Okay, yeah, maybe you could touch base with Kevin and see what happened, but because it seems like that's a
I
possible.
don't think he's there in that position anymore.
Oh, I don't know, but maybe whoever his successor, you can find out. I know I have about 20 seconds left, so I'll ask a quick question here. You know, a lot of the self-driving cars actually over the past few years have really started to improve. And I was talking to someone that was at Waymo, and she was telling me one of the big issues right now in terms of them rolling out more self-driving cars has been government regulations or lack thereof in terms of really being able to enable this. And so what's going on in terms of, on a federal level, trying to grease the skid, so to speak, on self-driving cars? Because with self-driving cars, it solves a lot of problems, right? So it solves some of the congestion issues, it solves safety issues, it also solves some of the carbon issue, right? And so, and you know, and it's not just the person I talked to at Waymo. I talked to several other people in the self-driving area, and you know, I can't say it's totally solved on the technical side, but it's solved to a great extent. Even, you know, you look at some of the Tesla full self-driving, it's getting, you know, pretty good reviews at this point. And so where are we at on the federal level in terms of legislation on this item?
So Congress has tried, this Congress and last Congress, to create a regulatory framework for automated vehicles. There hasn't been a consensus that they've been able to reach, primarily because in many respects, it's organized labor has been opposed to, concerned about the impact it would have on commercial motor vehicles. So they have been working to try to address that. That legislation stalled last year in the middle of this current Congress. It hasn't been revisited. I have not heard that there's any real effort. It's been led by Gary Peters from Michigan. I have not heard that there's any real effort to try to bring that back at this point in time. You know, from the agency side, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, as you know from the title, is just focused on safety. They're not in an act of promoting any kind of vehicle. They're really trying to make sure that all vehicles, including EVs, electric vehicles, and all other cars are safe. That's primarily in terms of the federal government, the agency side, the executive branch, what they're doing.
Okay, well, I think we should try to push for this. You know, we're Silicon Valley. I think, you know, I was talking to the person we were at an event in Half Moon Bay, and she was telling me about like why she couldn't take a self-driving car there was because legislation doesn't enable it, even though theoretically, technically they could have. So if we can help support that, I think that'd be great. I think it would be good for not just, you know, convenience, but it's also good for the environment. It's also good for safety. It's also good for land use, right? Because you think about how much land is used for parked cars, it's pretty incredible. So appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
A few more questions myself, but before I begin, Mr. Palmer, I'm just so I'm curious. Is that a witch in the window? I'm trying to figure it out.
Yes, Councilmember. It's actually one hanging on my lamp.
Oh, okay. There you go. I think I've seen too many Halloween movies already. I keep expecting it to turn towards you, and it's freaking me out a little bit. But it's a good decoration.
Laughter, but
okay, so yeah, a few questions. Kind of first couple on the Inflation Reduction Act. Will federal funds? I understand there are. At least I believe this is in the Inflation Reduction Act, federal funds for electric vehicle charging. Will that be made available directly to local governments, or will that be a similar process as you described in other ways where it would be money given to the state and local governments would need to apply for a grant?
David, do you know the answer to that?
I can take this one actually. So council member, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. There is, as Steve mentioned, tax credits for the purchase of electric vehicles. The most significant source of funding for electric vehicle infrastructure charging, let's say, is through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So there is $1.25 billion that's going to be eligible for Palo Alto and other cities to directly apply for that funding. That will be coming up likely this fall because it's expected to be released with the formula funding that will be going through the state. And the formula funding should be coming out because USDOT just approved all of the national electric vehicle infrastructure plans. And so that was one of the big hurdles, the NEVI plans, as people or DOT is referring to them. That was a big hurdle before this funding could be released. And so if DOT is able to meet the deadlines set by the bipartisan infrastructure law, the funding is supposed to be coming out 1 year from passage of the bill. So that'd be mid-November is when we're expecting more information at the very least on those. But yes, the city will absolutely be eligible to apply for the $1.25 billion discretionary funding.
Great, thank you. And then continuing on back on, then I guess since it wasn't included in the Inflation Reduction Act, correct? So then, no, okay. Then another one that I do believe is included in the Inflation Reduction Act. I spoke with Congress member Swalwell a few weeks ago about grade separation funding in the Inflation Reduction Act, and he said that there are billions there that potentially the Bay Area could be able to, the cities in the Bay Area could apply for grade separations. Could you speak more on that?
So I hate to correct you again, council member, but it is in the infrastructure bill where there's funding for grade separation elimination programs. There is, I don't have the number right on the top of my head, but it is several $1 billion that will be made available over 5 years. There are two different programs, both through the competitive grant program that the city can apply for, and then money that goes to Caltrans that they can then allocate for grade separation projects. That amount of money is a much smaller pot of money. It's the competitive grant program in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that funding will be available.
Okay, thank you. And has staff been applying for that? I mean, is that already ongoing?
Staff is tracking it. I do not have the specific details, but I will follow up with them and make sure that this is on their radar. They are well aware that the funding is available. I don't know about all the details for them, but I'll follow up.
Great, thank you.
Council member, if I may, and I apologize for interrupting, but also to make you sure you're aware that earlier this year, Santa Clara VTA did request from Congresswoman Eshoo a $2 million earmark that was included in the House bill for grade separation projects in North County. Now, it doesn't specifically say Palo Alto. There, as you know, there are several grade sep projects in the northern part of the county, but it is something that VTA has been working to try to address as well, and working with the city, and we've been working with staff to make sure that there's coordination on that effort.
Great.
And that's planning funding. Funding to plan for grade separations versus the actual grade separation itself, but it's still towards the greater good of the project.
Absolutely, thank you. Will cities like Palo Alto be able to apply for HUD's Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Grant Program? Our staff report was a little vague on the details of what cities would be able to apply for that.
The city will be able to apply. That is one source of funding that I think that staff wanted to highlight, and that we wanted to point out to you as well. Just that HUD is continuing to release funding, but that one, the city is eligible to apply for the funding, to answer your question directly.
Great, thank you. Then another question here. So I'm unsure what the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy and Hazard Mitigation Plan Alignment Guide, that's to the federal government, correct? So I didn't make that clear in my notes. Yes.
Yes,
okay.
council member, that's correct.
So is this just a guide to help cities kind of develop better resiliency plans, or is that going to provide any federal funding to help mitigate against natural disasters such as wildfires?
There is wildfire mitigation funding as well as disaster mitigation funding that's being provided, but not through that plan. That plan is specifically to act as more technical guidance and suggestions on hazard mitigation, as well as I think it was the combination of the economy and that meets hazard mitigation for that guide.
Okay, thank you. And then just a follow-up on Councilmember Cormack's kind of points on council members traveling to DC for these purposes. Do you know why that ended? What would be needed to be able to kind of jumpstart that again?
Excellent question. Sorry, Mr. Palmer.
No, go ahead.
The last trip was planned in 2020. I think the flights were all booked and that was when we had to cancel. And we did not do one in 2021 or this year. Knowing that the council has interest and that the ability to travel is a little bit safer than it was before, we can definitely work to coordinate such a trip. I think in other years, it's been linked to the National League of Cities Conference because some council members will already be traveling to Washington, DC, and it's an excellent time to then tack on these extra meetings. So in planning, sort of reinvigorating all parts of our legislative program, we will take this into account for this upcoming year, knowing the council has interest.
Great. You know, it sounds meaningful, and it was helpful hearing from Mr. Palmer as well as how effective that can be. All right, those are all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Palmer and Mr. Haynes, for being here tonight. We'll let you get to sleep, and we'll move on then to our state.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You can pull the presentation back up. And this evening, I have Mr. Nicolo DeLuca as well as Ms. Carly Shelby, who will be providing the state update, and then we'll go on to legislative guidelines thereafter. It's a giant item, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Cotton Gaines. Chairperson and committee members, Nicolo DeLuca, Vice President, Townsend Public Affairs. Good seeing you all. More importantly, with me this evening is my colleague, Carly Shelby. We will be doing a Sacramento overview. We will talk about specific Palo Alto efforts and wins. We will talk about what we see is on the horizon for the upcoming legislative session. And then, as Ms. Cotton Gaines mentioned, happy to answer any questions you all may have. So here we go. Legislative session ended August 31st. And then the governor had until September 30th to act on all the bills. Because we love data and it's fun to see how many bills are introduced. Here we go. 2,055 bills were introduced this year. Key data point, this was the second year of a 2-year bill cycle. Legislature passed 1,166 pieces of legislation. Governor signed almost 1,000 and vetoed almost 170. His veto rate this year, 16%. Last year, 7.8%. He vetoed a lot of bills this year that we were a little bit surprised about. And what was helpful was in his veto message, for a lot of them, if it was suggesting ongoing state funding, the governor was clear saying, we don't know what the state outlook is going to look like this year. So, I'm returning this bill without my signature. Going into 23, and starting in about a month from now, we've got a lot of races going on. We're looking at 20 plus new assembly members and almost 10 new senators. What that means is there's going to be a lot of education going on and a lot of explaining to members outside of our district what the city of Palo Alto is focused on and what some of our priorities are. Next up is the adopted budget provisions. Just kind of quick overview. The budget that was approved is $307.9 billion in total spending. It was around $100 billion surplus. Kind of let that sink in. $49 billion was for discretionary use. There was a lot of one-time funding formulas. Kind of the five main buckets: healthcare expansion, inflation relief package, $2 billion for housing investments. So that's affordable housing and homelessness. Of course, building the reserve, which Governor Newsom has carried on since Governor Brown was around, and then a $19 billion multi-year climate package. All right, we talked about all this money. What does it mean for Palo Alto? Three great things that we're extremely proud of. First, direct allocations to the city, also known as earmarks. $2 million for Newell Road Bridge replacement. That was championed through Senator Becker. And then the second, $5.2 million, which is a replacement of Fire Station 4, which was championed through Assemblymember Berman. I would really like to thank Ms. Cotton Gaines and all of city staff for for all the hard work on this. Around January, maybe even December, we were working on a city budget letter. That was a menu of CIP needs that we had that we submitted to our senator and our assembly member. But just submitting a letter, as you all know, that doesn't do it. We submitted a letter with a lot of great information about each project, followed up directly with both offices, asked them what their priorities were, what did they want to spend funding on, and I worked back and forth on that. And then a lot of work with the Assembly and Senate budget committees, leadership, and others. So really happy to have played a role, but really tipping the cap to city staff. $7.2 million for two great projects, and was, we're very happy to receive that. Moving up to the next slide, another funding success that we were really proud to be a part of, and it was at the end, was a Home Key Award, 26+ million to the City and Life Moves to help address the unhoused. Senator Becker, Assemblymember Berman, they were also really helpful, helping push this at the last minute, working with the governor's office and the Business Consumer Affairs and Housing Agency. What was probably the best received about this award and kind of the greater capital sense, kind of the world that Carly and I work in and interface in, was that the city of Palo Alto applied for a home key project, submitted a really good project with a partnership with a service provider, and got that award. Homelessness in one city is addressed in a different way from another city. But the fact that Palo Alto and its staff, and also working with the county, went out and aggressively and proactively was seeking funding was well received. So, kind of it doesn't matter if you're a well-to-do community or maybe you're a struggling community, homeless is homeless. And if you go and you're trying to find solutions, it's very well received amongst the governor, his administration, and many others. So just really highlighting that and the good amount of goodwill that came from that. I'm just going to talk about the legislative themes, and then I'm going to stop talking, and Carly's going to go on about the city specific bills and some other bills of interest. But again, kind of five major legislative themes this year: climate resiliency, which also tied to the budget; housing and land use, which, as you all know, over the last few years, there's been a lot of housing bills; behavioral health, which was really led by the governor and his legislation called Care Court, about how to address the severely mental ill and how to provide them safety and services, while at the same time trying to minimize any of the impact amongst everyday working people. Then public safety, and then Brown Act reform. So with that, Ms. Shelby will talk about some of the high profile bills and some of the bills that the city took positions on.
Yeah, hello committee members, Carly Shelby with Housing and Public Affairs. Great to be with you all this evening. I will provide a brief overview of some of the outcomes of some of the bills the city weighed in on, beginning with some of the high profile legislative outcomes relating to housing and land use. So Assembly Bill 2011 and Senate Bill 6 both authorize housing development projects in site zone for retail, office, parking, or along transit rich corridors, so long as developers utilize either stricter labor standards or adhere to stricter affordability requirements. Both of these passed into law. You'll note that they become effective July of 2023 versus the typical January 1st implementation timeline. This was kind of a strategic staggering of the implementation for both of these bills. Again, we have AB 2097 by Assemblymember Friedman. This measure prohibits parking or public agencies from imposing parking minimums on specified residential, commercial, and other developments located within 1/2 mile of public transit. This was signed into law and it will become effective January 1st of the new year. And then we can move on to the next slide. So relating to Brown Act, we have Senate Bill 1100 by Senator Cortese. This authorizes the presiding member of legislative body to remove an individual for disrupting the meeting and defines disrupting for these purposes. This was more of a clarifying measure. There was a lot of talk through the legislative session about specifically local agencies having issues with members of the public disrupting meetings. And then we have AB 1944 by Assemblymember Lee. This was kind of one of the more aggressive open meetings bills that we saw throughout the legislative session. It would have allowed members of the legislative body to use teleconferencing without noticing their teleconference location, but really would have allowed them to utilize teleconferencing whenever they so pleased, even after the state of emergency was lifted and AB 361 expired. The city's position on this was to support it. Unfortunately, it did not advance. There were several iterations of amendments throughout the legislative session that precluded its passing. And then we can move on to the next slide. Again, a lot of Brown Act meetings this session. We have Assembly Bill 2449 by Assemblymember Rubio. This one allows until 2026 members of the legislative body to use teleconferencing without noticing their locations. However, there are specific conditions to this bill, specifically that cannot be used more than 20% of meetings throughout the year. And it has to be utilized only under specific emergency circumstances. And then we have Assembly Bill 2647 by Assemblymember Levine. This exempts local agencies from making materials available for public inspection at the time they distribute them to members to less than the 72 hours before the meeting, only if the agency meets certain requirements. Both the city supported both these measures and they will both become effective January 2023. And then we have Senate Bill 960 by Senator Skinner. This eliminates the requirement that that a person be a United States citizen to become a peace officer. The city supported this bill and it was signed into law. And then we have Senate Bill 1000 by Senator Becker. This would have required local enforcement agencies to de-encrypt their radio communications and have them accessible to the public. The city was supportive of this bill, but it did not advance out of its policy committee. And then we have Assembly Bill 1737. This was originally a bill that would have required city or local oversight over these children's camps. It was amended throughout the legislative session and ultimately ended up with the California Department of Social Services kind of taking over those responsibilities. The bill went through tons of amendments. Ultimately, the author decided to place the bill in the inactive file and it was enacted for the remainder of the session. And then we have AB 2259 by Assemblymember Berman. This would have created a grant program to help kind of curb the use of substances and help foster youth with substance use disorders for residing in these family-based settings. The city supported both of these measures and both did not advance. And then finally, we have Assembly Bill 2181 by Assemblymember Berman. This would have made changes to the board of the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, would have kind of reorganized the members and how those were made up. The city opposed this measure with comments and it did not advance.
And then I'm just going to quickly wrap it up and happy to take questions. Just want to move to the second to last slide about looking ahead 2023 legislative session. What we've done this year, which is based off of a lot of interaction with the PNS committee back in 2021, was continuing the Palo Alto legislative strategy, which is really three prongs. One is continued strategic engagement on our legislative priorities. So making sure it's tight and it's focused, and we're staying really focused on our main priorities. Of course, some bills may come and go, but it's really the top priority, staying focused. proactive advocacy for funding requests, and then closing the loop. Number 3 is opportunities for coalition building. So with that said, we are happy to answer any questions. Greatly appreciate all the hard work of staff, and thank you P&S committee for another great year.
Mr. Chair, do you want us to just go through the last few slides on the timeline and the legislative guidelines, or take a break to answer the questions on state legislation, then come back?
Yeah, let's continue on the kind of format we've been doing. So let's take a break to ask questions and comments on then our California legislative year, then we'll move to the final part. Okay, great. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Stone and Mr. DeLuca and Ms. Shelby. I feel like we just saw you. But, welcome back with a little bit more time for detail. So just in terms of reviewing the prior session, thanks for the report, which was really helpful. I often say, and you probably don't hear this little lecture, that, the climate work we're doing here is really the most important work that any of us are doing. And so it was interesting to see the 68% increase in energy consumption by 2045. I assume that's electric. So I would just say that anything we can do in this area would really be, at near the top of my list in terms of the importance and things that have to be done at a state level. I mean, we are justifiably proud of a lot of our utilities work here, but let's be honest, it still comes over the grid. I just want to emphasize how important that is. And I don't know that we prioritize things in our legislative guidelines, and that's just a comment of one. And then I do just want to take a moment to, reflect on just the dollars that you all were able to help us get. I can't wait to see that new bridge go over to East Palo Alto and our neighbors. And since I live in South Palo Alto, can't wait for our fire station to finally be updated. And I really hope that, with those and with the Home Key project, which hopefully will, it's a 12-month, construction period. I hope that you'll be invited to come down and participate and see the ribbon cuttings and the openings. I know your work can seem sometimes disconnected from the actual part. So I hope at some point you'll be invited to come down and see in real life and not just Zoom and a picture. And then with respect, I know it's really not very glamorous, but I know you guys really had to jump in on the ARAF, and I appreciate you helping out with that. That goes under the radar for people who aren't paying attention to this volatile revenue source we have. It's a little bit difficult to follow, but I do appreciate your work on that. And then I was very interested in the looking forward part, the budget reserves, and then the changes to leadership. We've had these just like off the charts budget surpluses that have, triggered problems we had no idea might even occur. Although I guess that's what the GAN limit is for. So what reserve changes might be contemplated? And then do you just want to talk a little bit about the leadership changes? And I presume you mean the assembly, but like to hear a little bit more about those two things.
Absolutely. And Councilmember, thanks for your kind words. We've been working with staff as it relates to Home Key announcement and making sure our delegation knows how valued they are and appreciative. And of course, the governor too, because that's really his program, which I think when it was first announced, people were kind of wondering what it'd be like. And now everyone's clamoring for more Home Key dollars. So when it comes to the surplus, I don't have a master's in the economy, but from who we've been talking to, we're expecting another surplus this upcoming year. So calendar year 23. What that will look like to be determined. The numbers are already a little bit low for the third quarter. However, the Department of Finance is already putting out some kind of notifications of, hey, we're not going to hit the marks that we're expecting. We got to stay focused. We've got to stay conservative. That's almost an annual warning from the Department of Finance because that's their job and they do a great job of doing that. But we are expecting a level of surplus. We also, kind of have that theory from Wayne Gretzky, you miss every shot you never take. which is why we want to submit a letter from the city to our delegation as to capital improvement projects, one-time funding projects that we could use some support with and some help with. Love hearing your comments about all the work that the city is doing where it relates to the climate and the grid, and that's another good thing to let all the new members know. Leadership, yeah, there's, without getting overly political, as you all know, towards, when was it, Carly? June, there was an effort in the assembly to show a number of votes from Assembly Member Robert Rivas when he was, looking at a run for the speaker. Speaker Rendon has made it clear he's not going to give up his seat, and he wants to remain being the speaker. It was close to how many votes Assembly Member Robert Rivas had, and with a lot of members being termed out and new members coming in, there's definitely that discussion's not over. We are looking at but that's on the assembly side leadership. There could be some changes. And what that means is then there could be changes as the committee chairs, housing chair, budget chair, transportation chair, those could all change. So that's things that we're not only keeping our eye on, but making sure the city's aware of what's going on. The Senate is fine. Pro Tem Atkins is not termed out. She remains in charge. She remains in a position of authority, and her chairs remain there too. New members in the assembly, and it's about 23 new members coming based on members being termed out in redistricting. As you recall, a couple of years ago, they did the term limits, the 12-year term limits. So the assembly is feeling the impact this year. 2 years from now, the Senate will then also have that impact of members being termed out. A lot of close race watching throughout the Bay Area, Southern California. And once all the elections are said and done, we will share a memo with the city team as to who the new members are, where they're from, and sort of what some of their key stats are. Carly, anything you want to add to that?
I think you covered that very well. I think that as we approach the new session, which will be the beginning of a 2-year session with this new class of legislators, there will be a lot of new ideas, a lot of new bills. So it's going to be really interesting when we come into January and February before that bill introduction deadline, because then we'll kind of get a sense of how the caucus or the Democratic caucus has shifted, if it has at all, and kind of what those new priorities are.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again. And we're glad to have you on board. And I'm not a hockey fan, but didn't Wayne Gretzky also say you're supposed to skate to where the puck is going to be? So since there's going to be a surplus, I'm glad you're skating towards that for us.
Councilmember Tanaka?
Do you guys know where we are in terms of fixing El Camino? So El Camino, I don't know if you know, but it's a total wreck right now in Palo Alto. It's not so bad in other cities like Malibu, Menlo Park, but you go to Palo Alto and it's like you need an SUV driving on El Camino.
I do not know the status of repairs to El Camino, but happy to work with staff to see what might be eligible for grants or what have you.
Okay, because I remember it was supposed to be fixed like a couple of years ago, but it's way past due, and I've been getting a lot of complaints about it. And I don't know why, if we have all this budget surplus, we can't get it fixed, because other cities have gotten fixed.
Councilmember Tanaka, we can follow up with our transportation staff, and that will give Mr. DeLuca and his team some guidance for advocacy to Caltrans.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I have brought up to Assemblymember Berman, but I haven't heard back. So hopefully you guys could get some traction here. And then what happened to 1944? So what stopped it?
Oh, Carly, that's in your bailiwick.
Yeah, so there was a lot of concern, especially from the local government chairs, about kind of unrestricted teleconferencing allowances. And so there were numerous amendments that were proposed that would have only allowed it for emergency circumstances, and would have required local officials to disclose a lot of kind of more private information that we felt, and the author's office felt was kind of crossed the line a little bit. So the Governance and Finance Committee actually proposed those amendments, and Assemblymember Lee ended up holding the bill because it had transformed so far away from his original vision. We still have another year of 361 provisions. So we could see additional changes in 2023. However, I know that there will be, again, that pushback from those local government chairs about kind of just that unrestricted access, and they really want to make sure that, you know, local officials are held accountable and show up to meetings. So kind of finding that line is something that has been difficult between, you know, those that want more transparency and kind of more flexibility, and those that feel that, you know, officials should be in person all the time. So we'll kind of see what happens in 2023, but we'll definitely keep the city updated on any developments on that front.
Well, for the sake of the environment and for the sake of flexibility and also just more transparency, because I think it's more transparent, because a lot of times when we're live, you can't see who we're talking to, right? But with when it's online, it's all there. So I think we should continue to push really hard on it and try to get this over the line the way it was originally. What happened to, okay, if we have all the surplus, what about funding some of our grade crossings? Where's that at?
So council member, when it comes to the surplus and when it comes to district direct spending, there's a certain threshold, a certain target amount that will either be beneficial or you're asking for way too much. Having worked with the city before, grade separation funding, respectfully, there's no legislator that's going to be able to earmark the amount that you would need for a grade separation project. Meaning, if we made the ask to Senator Becker or to Assemblymember Berman, that's just outside of how much they could secure for their district. However, part of the transportation package, which included funding for high-speed rail, also included funding for grade separation for priority projects that are at a certain level. There was, maybe right before the pandemic, we did a legislative advocacy day where we met with our delegation and then transportation staff and other staff. We talked about the city's need for funding for grade separation. I think at that point in time, you're getting closer to design and getting closer to actual hard dollars for the construction side. We have been speaking with Ms. Cotton Gaines about, and it's going to be discussed further on in the agenda item, about another day, another set of days in Sacramento, of which transportation funding, grade separation funding would be one of the topics to discuss. So bottom line, there's funding from this year's budget for grade separation. When it comes to having a legislator request enough funding to do a grade separation project, we had advised that we would pick other projects due to the sheer size of how much is needed. And we are excited to work with the city to identify the exact locations for the grade separation funding, work with Caltrain, work with the county, work with others, work with the CTC and others in the transportation world to come up with a real plan of attack to help secure those funds.
Well, we definitely need the funds. So if there's a surplus and there's a way, I think definitely push for it. Sounds like you're trying to do that, so I appreciate that. Last topic, price of gas. Have you guys noticed how high the gas is?
It's extremely high, and as Carly told me the other day when we were actually leaving some meetings in Palo Alto, the governor is calling a special session in December to talk about that exactly. And there's been rumors of a tax proposal. There's been rumors of a windfall proposal. Yeah, it's ridiculous how high it just jumped from like $5 to $7 per gallon. But no, the governor's been very, very clear about that. He's even had some ads on TV about how high the prices are and some of his plans to do something. Carly, when's the last time a governor called a special session? I mean, that's very uncommon for that to happen.
Yeah, so it was under Governor Brown in 2015 to remedy some county related expenditures, I believe. But yeah, the legislature will all reconvene on December 5th, which also coincides with the day that the new members will be sworn in, which was kind of strategic on his part to not have those members up for election kind of make a politically difficult vote during that time.
I read that the state actually shut down some refineries, which was really bizarre because if we were having really high prices, why did the refineries shut down?
Councilmember, I don't know, but happy to research that and get back to you on it.
Okay. It just doesn't seem to make sense because the price of gas really hits people on the lowest end of the economic ladder the most, especially here in Palo Alto, where a lot of the people are driving in to provide services to our city. And so I don't think it's a good situation. I mean, a lot of the wealthier people have EVs, so they don't really care. But everyone else who isn't rich, it really impacts people. So I think this should be a priority to really make sure that we have reasonable prices, because it's really just California. I mean, I saw like $7.50, $8. It was crazy. I mean, it's probably highest in the nation, right? Even past Hawaii. It's just something has to be done. So anyways, you guys know the issue, and hopefully you guys can try to push on coming up with some sort of resolution.
Good evening, Mr. DeLuca and Ms. Shelby. Good to see you both again. And Mr. DeLuca, always nice to see the bow tie you wear for us. Always.
Thank you very much.
Just see what it's going to look like. Well, first, just want to thank staff, thank the TPA team for the millions secured. It seems like overall it was a good year for Palo Alto, both from money that we received from the state as well as the federal government. So that's exciting. Excited to see what we can continue to do in the future. So thank you for all of your work on that. One thing that really struck me on the slide you were showing with like the $2 billion for housing investments out of a total of practically $308 billion. I'm not sure if I misunderstood what you meant by housing investments, but I mean, is that real? I mean, that is far less than 1% of the state budget going towards housing investment. Is that actual funds that the state has provided in order to be able to create true, I mean, I guess it would be a mostly affordable housing. So things like Project Home Key, I mean, that's the entire pot is just $2 billion.
Yes, council member, your comments are very much in line with a lot of the affordable housing builders and others, whereas they're very grateful for the $2 billion, but there was a level of frustration that almost just like what you said, like that's it. So the $2 billion essentially is broken into two pots. $1 billion for homelessness, which includes funding to cities, counties, and continuums of care to address homelessness as they see fit. And then essentially $1 billion on the actual shelter. So that would include Home Key, the multi-housing program, the Affordable Housing Accelerator program, and others. The world of affordable housing builders, they are already back at it. In fact, they were starting about a month ago, issuing another request for ongoing funding for the affordable housing, actually build the units. So there's definitely legislation on the production side, but as you're alluding to, there's a level of thank you, but we'd love more when it comes to funding to actually produce the housing.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, it's absurd, and I think Sacramento and the governor, just the expression "put your money where your mouth is." They're just, I mean, for all the talk that we hear from Sacramento every single year, build, build, build. We need more housing, and we are all in agreement. We desperately need more affordable housing, but similar to what Councilmember Tanaka was talking about, as far as the investment for grade separation is enormous. Equally so, to be able to build ourselves out of the dearth of affordable housing that's across this state, and to give $2 billion and then have it split up into those two pots. I think is rather, I mean, it's better than nothing, but still pretty insulting that that's the amount of money that's coming out for this. And I think it's just clear, if you are a market rate housing developer in this state, that Sacramento will do everything they can to clear regulations in order for them to be able to build market rate housing, which in Palo Alto is luxury housing, which means housing for, more housing for millionaires. But we're not getting the funds for these affordability requirements, and in order to be able to meet our RENA requirements based on that is simply an impossibility. And I'm also curious to see what you start to observe with RENA and these housing element plans being accepted. We're seeing being reported out of the media right now how the pretty dismal rate of acceptance rates there, and I'm curious kind of what Sacramento is thinking there as far as, is this really a plan that they have implemented with the hopes that it achieves, or is it designed for cities to fail? And again, as a teacher, if I'm having an assessment and I'm having that amount of that fail rate, I did something wrong. It's not my students. I think Sacramento needs to look themselves in the mirror and go, who's wrong here? It's the cities or is it Sacramento? And I think they've created an unreasonable standard, and they're not providing the funds to be able to help us meet that goal. So that's frustrating. Sorry, that was a long rant. A couple of additional questions. So on grid reliability, completely in agreement with Councilmember Cormack on that. Reading your report, I only saw SB 846 kind of related to grid reliability, and that relates to kind of Councilmember Tanaka's interest in nuclear power plants. Is there anything else that Sacramento has done this year or has planned to modernize and improve the electric grid?
Part of the governor's energy package, and there's AB 205, also talked about efforts to reduce the grid and take some of the stresses off the grid. Some of the funding package also was included in that. That legislation from Senator Dodd was really the big one. It was kind of like the crown jewel in the environmental legislative package. There was a couple of other bills that relates to it, but then there was also funding. I think in this upcoming year, there's about 200 million. And then over the next 4 or 5 years, there's around 100 million and then 200 million more for to address the demand on the grid side. Happy to drill down deeper into that to see if there are some funding opportunities for the utility side of the city. But there was some funding for grid reliance.
Great. And yeah, I think it'd be helpful if you can find if there's any additional funding for cities as well there. On AB 2334, wasn't clear. Does that apply to Palo Alto or any other parts of Santa Clara County for that matter?
I am sorry, which one was 2344?
2334. Sorry, I gotta maybe look back at your.
Sure. It was in the memo. Let me pull that up.
It was in the memo, yeah.
1 sec. I will get that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this bill, I'm just looking to confirm the counties. Yeah, so AB 2334 would be applied in 17 counties, including Santa Clara. So that's.
Sorry, your mic. I didn't quite hear you very well there.
Yeah.
Could you say that again?
So 2334 would be applied to the city of Palo Alto. It is within the 17 counties, so it would be applied to Santa Clara County.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, one question, I'm just, because I know you represent other cities, and I don't think this is an issue that necessarily impacts Palo Alto all that much because of the time that our schools already start. But we've had that bill, right, that went into effect this year requiring high schools to start no earlier than 8:30. And I've experienced now on my commute to the school I teach at, Carmelmont in Belmont, my commute has doubled this year because of that. And the line of traffic going into that school is about a mile down the street. And it just seems to, this is always one of my frustrations when we legislate, if we have a goal, right? One of our goals is climate and GHG reduction and all that. And yet we do all these things that frustrate that goal. And this bill in particular has, I think, had that impact on several cities such as Belmont and San Carlos. It also has had a disproportionate impact on students from poor communities that have to bus in, having to wake up very early to be able to catch those buses and frequently missing class. And I'm curious, have you been hearing concerns about that, talks either within Sacramento or other of your clients of an interest in reversing that or modifying it?
So I have not heard comments about it, but that's not to say that they aren't there. So we're
Okay.
happy to reach out to some of our other cities to check in. I will say, council member, almost verbatim, what you said was what we put in our letter. Palo Alto was pretty active fighting against this bill. And this was, I think this bill was run 3 different times from Senator Portantino, but almost nearly identical to what you said were our concerns. One, it's going to clog up the roads because it's going to put parents and commuters on the road at the same time. 2, it's going to impact GHGs in a negative way. And then 3, and it was a sensitive topic, we're like, we got to be careful if you got more kids being dropped off in more cars, you know, fingers crossed it doesn't cause any pedestrian conflicts or what have you. Happy to reach out to the author's office, see if they're considering any type of amendments or alterations, and we'll work through Ms. Cotton Gaines to report back what we hear from them. And then also happy to do a bit of an informal survey for the municipalities we work with. And we'll also pick different counties to hear if it's Berry County-wide or what have you, but happy to look into that.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And walk into any high school classroom, I think, in the state and ask them if they are getting more sleep, and the students will actually laugh. So I've asked all my classes and they all laughed in my face. Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in for a moment. Thank you, Chair Stone, for allowing me to add something. I was at our Community Services Department management meeting not that long ago. And one of the reasons our middle school athletics programs aren't fully staffed is because we have relied on one of our sources as our high school students who come back and teach those and coach those classes. And they can't do it because their days are ending later. And so one of the concerns I know many people had, and I was one of them, was about jobs, was about the students, high school students being able to get to jobs on time. And so already in our city, our middle school students have fewer opportunities for after school athletics. I think law of unintended consequences, but I'll just add that as one that, you know, perhaps people didn't think through, and perhaps they decided it was outweighed by the importance of sleep that I'm hoping some high school students are getting. But I'll just add that on a real world example here in the city.
Thank you. I hadn't been hearing that, so that's helpful as well. So hopefully that's some good feedback for you. And but yeah, otherwise, and I see I'm out of time. So thank you, Mr. DeLuca and Ms. Shelby, for being here again tonight, and we'll probably see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
And
All right,
Mr.
back to
DeLuca,
you.
Ms. Shelby, if you could stay on just in case any questions come up during the legislative guidelines review.
Absolutely.
Can pull up the PowerPoint again, please? These are the last 3 slides. Thank you for working with us on these multiple parts of this giant item. So for the legislative guidelines that are before you this evening, we essentially made 2 incredibly small changes. We changed the date from 2022 to 2023 and erased 1 word in the prefacing marks just where it seemed unnecessary to have fairly and likely in the same sentence. The rest of the legislative guidelines are the same. One of the items that came up at last week's city council discussion on the SCAP is what's in the box here on the left. And the one on the right, by the way, is just a screenshot. So please refer to the packet page for the details. That's on packet page 8, starting there. But on the left-hand side, the box says the support government action to expand the workforce in trades and technical disciplines necessary to support building and vehicle electrification and grid modernization. This is going into the utilities legislative guidelines if there is interest of this committee, and also including this in the general legislative guidelines. We did want to flag that for you here as part of your discussion. And there have been no other items clearly demarcated to staff to add to the legislative guidelines, nor do we have any staff generated ones for this year. But the recommendation, which will come in about 2 slides, is that we would have the committee forward the legislative guidelines to the city council with any suggested changes that you may have. So then I'll go to the next slide, which is actually a timeline for the legislative session. As I mentioned earlier, trying to reflect the level of energy that the city council wants to put into our legislative program. We're trying to be a little bit more formal on some things that maybe we've done informally in years prior. So this is kind of a high level work plan that we wanted to run by this committee and get your feedback on. Right about now is when we get this overview of what this is state focused, by the way. I should have said that. This is where we talk about the previous legislative session. We bring your legislative guidelines to this committee and then the full city council for approval. And we use that as our guidepost going into the next year. Then in the winter, we're recommending and we're asking this committee for feedback, something like a legislative reception or a dinner, which would be with our state and county elected officials. The city council has expressed some interest in having different elected officials come and speak at a city council meeting to talk about the things that they are doing in their respective areas. So for example, Simidian, or my gosh, Supervisor Simidian, the words are not coming out in the right order, and all the different things that he's doing at the county level, as well as Assemblymember Berman and Senator Becker. We thought that it would be a good idea if the city council had an opportunity to have them all in one space and talk about some of our legislative priorities, some of our budget priorities, and then to also use that as we're going into the next legislative year. So that is one of the ideas that we have on the table for the committee to consider, and staff would work on those details. And then in late February, bringing a discussion to the full city council on legislation. We heard the city council loud and clear this year that there was interest in the whole council having an opportunity to weigh in on the legislative program and not just this committee. So we're trying to build in additional touch points for the full city council. And the first being in February is after the bill deadline for people submitting all of their bills, but it is before the deadline where all the bills are amended. So it'll give us a good chance to see what's in the world of all the thousands of bills, be able to understand where the council wants us to put a little more focus, and then we'll track those bills as people are amending them up and through the month of March. And then also we will continue to monitor the bills as staff and Townsend Public Affairs, excuse the acronym there, but TPA equals Townsend Public Affairs. And then going into spring 2023, scheduling a visit to Sacramento to discuss the city's priorities. That being the same thing that we spoke about related to the federal level, where it's really good to have that FaceTime with some of the agency staff as well as our delegation in Sacramento. And then going into May, having another policy and services update, and then also to the full city council. At that time, we'll be seeing more details on the budget, like the actual specifics on the budget and the trailer bill. So that's a really good time for us to have a touch point. And then going back to around this time, this sort of summer and late summer next year, same idea of where we are now, wrapping up the session. If there are things that we would like to encourage the governor to sign or not sign, and also just tracking the items that have made it through the legislative process, and then doing an update back with policy and services, and then rinse, wash, repeat, make tweaks that we need for the subsequent year. And the last slide then, the recommendation that's before the committee today, you've received updates, we're just accepting those. And then also approving the 2023 legislative guidelines with any proposed changes. And the second one is supporting the tentative legislative work plan with any suggestions that you have there, but that'll just be a guidepost for us as staff and the legislative advocates. And the last thing I will offer, which is not on the slides, is we are going through the request for proposals process right now, which I know the city council had a lot of interest in for both our state and federal advocates. The contracts expire at the end of this calendar year. And so our goal is to have new contracts in place by January. And so we will keep the committee up to speed. Next time you have this update, we will be able to tell you who the new contracts are. And that concludes our mega presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Okay, let me start with the guidelines. I think we should consider renaming the second one to climate and environment rather than just environmental. You can already see that there's climate ones in there, and I think it's broader than that. And I would like us to consider tonight adding a bullet under climate and environment that says, if I'm going to use your phrases here, strengthens and modernizes state and local electrical grids. I think that would capture both the topic I brought up earlier and then the work that needs to be done in the city. They are interconnected. If you think about what's happening with, the grid in other places of the state causing wildfires, which affects our air and our firefighters and our insurance, let alone, the devastation caused there. I think I can see I could almost probably guess which year each of these were added, based on how they're phrased and what's there. But I think we could do that here. And then I think leave the specific one that we discussed about workforce in the utilities, right? Because the one that I just described, workforce, developing a technical workforce to work on the electrical grid would absolutely strengthen and modernize both state and local electric grids. So that's where I am on the legislative guidelines. And then with respect to the tentative work plan, Ms. Cotton-Gaines, the one thing I didn't understand was legislative reception. Are you proposing a dinner that all the council is at? Is this a Brown Act problem? Like how on earth would we get them all to come at the same time?
These are great questions, Councilmember Cormack. It would be a public meeting. So
Okay.
we would be working with the city clerk's office and the city attorney's office to make sure that we are in compliance with the Brown Act. And the way that we are brainstorming it right now is that it would be an opportunity for the public to come in at the beginning, similar to like a city council retreat type of item. And then you can go into the discussion beyond there on sort of one topic of just an update and discussion. So we would continue to refine the details around that, but as a public meeting, it likely would have an opportunity for at least oral communications type of a part of the meeting is our guess.
Okay, I can imagine a wide variety of topics and a lot of people interested. So just leaping to the conclusion that a 1-minute time limit would probably be required for that many people with the broad topics. I think it's really interesting. I think the part that would be worth spending some more time on is the county part in real detail. So I think it's an interesting idea. I'm not 100% committed to it. I'd want to be sure I understand what, the other elected officials would get out of it, if it would be good use of their time, that kind of thing. So I don't know how effective it is to have them sort of come and we say things and they say things. And if what you're envisioning would be more interactive, more outcome-based, I think that would have some appeal. Thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at this and there's things are really broad, like reduce greenhouse emissions. And then there's things really specific like ban polystyrene containers, right? And so in these guidelines, is this supposed to be kind of like the priorities we want to see the state and federal government do? Is that basically what we're trying to do here?
Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka. I think I would describe it as our guidance for our interaction with the state and federal level. So we, as the work plan show, we don't often get to come in front of the city council with every piece of legislation that's proposed. Mm-hmm. So the idea behind these is it gives us enough authority and direction from the city council at a pretty broad level so that we can weigh in on the different bills that are coming or pieces of legislation or proposals. It's not perfect, and some things that are very contentious, our preference is to still bring those to the city council, which is why we are building in more touch points, because though some things may align with the legislative guidelines, it's still maybe a little bit tricky for us to just do that as staff. So that's kind of, it's a judgment call, but the idea of these is to provide us with, as staff and your legislative advocates at the state and federal level, with some direction.
Okay, well, if that's the case, I would like to see some of the things I talked about in here as well. So Like maybe under greenhouse gas emissions could be promote nuclear energy, for instance. Or I don't know where the salt cap would go, but maybe financial, I suppose. But that's something that hits everyone that lives here. So elimination of the salt cap, I think, would be really important to a lot of people here. And maybe in transportation, we could put something in there around self-driving cars, especially given that a lot of the companies that do that are here. So I think that would help bolster the economy as well. So those are the 3 additions I have. Thank you.
If I may ask one follow-up, I have 2 of the 3, so I do want to make sure I capture the first one. So you had the salt cap, you had the self-driving cars, and what was the other one? Renewable energy sources?
Nuclear energy.
Nuclear. Thank you so much. And then if I can also ask another follow-up question of, is your intention for this to be advocating for these different things, or is it supporting legislation specifically to create these? Just if you can provide a little bit more detail on.
I'd like
your
to see
intention.
either, actually.
Say one more time.
Either.
Okay, thank you. That's
Yeah, thank
helpful
you.
for me as guidance.
Sure.
Just a process. You're looking for a motion out of us though tonight.
Oh, yes, I'm not taking one individual. You guys have to agree together. I just wanted to pull that thread to make sure we all understood where he was going. with
Okay,
it.
thank you. I'm just curious, as far as legislative guidelines go, are like the council's kind of goals and priorities for a given year, is that kind of implicitly included within those legislative guidelines? How does that process work? Because here we are kind of approving it, and then we're going to go into 2023, but then we're going to set new goals. So how does that all get included?
I think they're linked. We haven't explicitly had a situation usually where one of your priorities isn't somewhere already covered in the legislative guidelines, but yeah, I think it's helpful if there are some of those topics to go ahead and include them in this document if you wanted to sort of be safe, but we understand those are the city council's priorities. So if there's different pieces of legislation in any given year that falls under those, we would try to bring those to the city council's attention as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm supportive of staff's recommendation and interested in Councilmember Cormack's recommendation. I think I missed, you mentioned something about non-including the labor piece, or?
I was just noting that staff said the labor piece is included in the Utilities Commission legislative guidelines, which is a companion piece. So we will be doing that. And just in the interest of keeping this a little bit more high level, I thought if we're broader, otherwise we're going to have to put them both in.
And can staff weigh in on kind of your preference or thought on that?
The city council last week did guide the staff to include it in the utilities legislative guidelines. So that is going to happen if that item hasn't come back to city council yet. So I think having a broader umbrella here is fine for our purposes if it would encompass that. And the intention is the legislative guidelines are working in tandem with one another.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, then Councilmember Cormack wants to make a motion.
All right. Could you put up the slide that had the last part? So I will move that we recommend to the city council that we approve the 2023 legislative guidelines with the following change. Are we okay with changing the title? I'll just go ahead and say, change the title of environmental to read climate and environment. Excuse me. And then B, add in the climate and environment section, a bullet, strengthen and modernize the state and local electrical grids. I guess you could just say electric grids.
And I'll second.
Yeah. Add a bullet in the climate and environment section reading, quote, strengthen and modernize the state and local electric grids. And if you, just this, sorry, I'll let you finish there. So after the word state, say and local. All right. I don't think I need to speak further to these. I will just add that in terms of how these relate to the priorities, or I guess I hesitate to bring up our values conversation again, but I think these are meant to be enduring things that are parameters as opposed to like specific work that we need to do in each year. So that's how I think about them.
I've got nothing to add. I concur. Councilmember Tanaka?
Yeah, I wanted to see if the maker and seconder would be open to some of the suggestions that I mentioned earlier. So maybe I'll just go through one at a time, and then you guys could tell me whether you accept or not. First one is elimination of the SALT cap. And I don't know if you guys are that tuned into it, but there's a $10,000 deduction limit that you could have per state. And so for high tax areas like California, especially like Palo Alto, it makes the people that live there pay a much bigger share of the federal tax than they would otherwise. And this is something that Trump put in place. And it's something which, our president and many others have been advocating to eliminate. And so I was wondering whether you guys would support that.
Is staff aware of any other times when we've taken a position on federal income tax policy that is relevant to individuals but not to the city?
I am not aware at this time.
So I appreciate your interest in it, Councilmember Tanaka, but I don't feel that it's related to our city business. I've just looked quickly through our guidelines here, and I don't see other areas, where we take a position on personal income taxes. Unless my seconder feels differently. No. Okay. So I do not accept that.
Okay. Let me move on. Second one is nuclear energy. And, I think you said it well, which is this climate change is probably one of the biggest existential threats to humanity. It's really, really important. And we want to, of course, support renewables. The big problem with renewables right now is what do you do at night? And energy storage still is not quite there yet. Pump hydro, especially with the droughts, very, very difficult. And the only solution that seems to be viable right now, at least on scale, is nuclear energy. So, thankfully the state actually kept Diablo Canyon open, so that's a good thing. But I think we want to be supportive because this is probably the one big knob we have to turn to actually help with our climate change. So I'm hoping that you guys would support that.
Councilmember Tanaka, do you envision that the city would promote a new nuclear facility?
New nuclear facilities, or perhaps supporting, for instance, expansion of Diablo Canyon. So there's a study out of Stanford which was proposing that we expand Diablo Canyon, and you've expanded, you could actually do desalination, which would help with our drought as well. It would also provide power, because right now, as we talked about, I guess a couple of council sessions ago, at night when the sun goes down, pretty much we're burning natural gas. Of course, we're offsetting that during the day, but still burning natural gas. And if we had nuclear power, we could desalinate during the day and then at night provide carbon-free electric. So I think that would be good for our environment.
Yeah, I'm familiar with your argument. I think it's more appropriate for that to be a colleague's memo that would refer the topic to the Utilities Advisory Commission. Speaking of unintended consequences, it's a complex topic, and I agree with you that it might be a component that we should consider in the medium run as a society. But I'm not ready to make a decision on that without staff working it through with the Utilities Advisory Commission. So I regret I cannot accept that. But again, I think a colleague's memo would be appropriate.
Okay. Last one here is promoting self-driving cars. I think we are pretty much the capital of self-driving car technology. There's a bunch of companies in our area, Waymo being one of the pioneers in this area. And just talking to some of the folks in this area, they're having a lot of trouble with legislation that, unfortunately, they say it hasn't been keeping up with some of the technology. And this has the potential of really be game-changing, both in terms of environment, in terms of land use, in terms of just fatalities that people are dying through car crashes all the time. So I was wondering whether you guys would be open to having something in there for that.
What is the phrasing you suggest?
So maybe it could be in transportation. So we could propose that support legislation that will enable self-driving car technology, something like that.
And why do you think it's not already covered under the first three bullets? You think it needs its own? It's not
not public transportation. I don't think it has anything to do with diverting traffic to residential neighborhoods.
Well, it certainly could.
I don't know, it's a bit of a stretch. And then the first one is, the thing that self-driving cars really does is every car needs like 3 parking spots, right? And you probably know that. So a large part of our land use is actually parking. And plus, there's also a lot of fatalities. So for a certain age range, it's the #1 cause of death. And also, just the cost of creating cars is crazy expensive in terms of the environmental cost. So I don't see that covered in transportation.
Again,
right now.
what is the wording that you want included there?
How about just simply promote self-driving technology?
Yeah, I think that's a little further than I'm ready to go.
Well, what might you be willing to go for then?
It's not my proposal, it's your proposal.
Okay, well, I'm making the offer here and I can't read your mind, so I don't know what's acceptable. I could keep guessing, but if you could tell me what might be close, we could try to get there.
Oh, you haven't described the problem we're trying to solve. You've said you've spoken with people who said
problem
that
that we're-
there's legislative problems. What is
Yeah.
an example of a legislative problem that we're trying to solve here?
So you can't legally take a self-driving car from, let's say, for instance, Mountain View to Half Moon Bay right now. You have to work through city by city by city. And some cities have it, like Mountain View has it, but we don't have it here in Palo Alto. So
is that a state problem or is that a city problem?
It could be a city problem, like Palo Alto could allow it. It could also be a state problem. The state could actually allow it to go between cities. It's also a federal issue because we want to go from California to Nevada. So it's a tough issue because there's legal issues that prevent the use of self-driving cars. And it's unfortunate because, this is the birthplace of Silicon Valley. A lot of technology has actually been invented in this area. And just so much good that could happen if we enable this.
Well, I think this is an area that's ripe for further research, but I'm not prepared at this point in time, based on recent articles about the state of the technology and impacts that have occurred to pedestrians in Arizona during testing, the length of time it's taken some of these to even come on board. Again, I think it's very interesting, but I'm certainly not ready to promote it until we understand more about the costs and any risks. So I regret that that's not accepted, but I think there are other ways for us to work on this. And if it's a city issue, I think we should do it at a city level.
Great, thank you. With no more discussion, if the clerk can call the vote. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mr.
ahead.
Chair. Just to clarify, are you also including the tentative work plan as this?
Yes, I think if the clerk scrolls down, I think it's probably there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes.
Just wanted to double check. Thank you so much.
Wait, while I'm thinking about it, should we add a bullet under 2 that says, direct staff to research the possibility of adding a federal visit? I see we have a state legislative advocacy day. Would this be a good place to include that?
If you'd like to include it, that's fine. I think we have enough information to sort of revive that, but I think to codify, for lack of a better term,
I think
Yes,
it might
that's
be
fine.
helpful. I mean, the mayor always has so much discretion about whether or not to cancel a meeting that allows other council members to attend. So I just think it'd be wise to go ahead and add that. So underneath too, maybe if we could have a bullet A. To research and recommend a federal advocacy, I guess I'd say visit as opposed to day. Day seems kind of short.
I think visit is fine, and we would likely connect it to the National League of Cities just because
Okay,
that's a,
in potentially in conjunction with the National League of Cities annual conference.
yes.
Okay.
There's some economies of scale there in the transportation.
Absolutely. If that's okay with
Yep,
my
I'll
seconder.
accept that.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no discussion. With a
Well, let him finish. The National League of Cities annual conference. Good enough.
The clerk can call the vote.
Councilmember Stone,
Yep, yes.
Councilmember Cormac,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
the motion carries 3-0.
Great, thank you. Moving on to item 2 and our last item of the night, our race and equity quarterly update. Staff have a report.
Yes, thank you so much. And this one is a verbal update. So give me one moment. It's a lot of scrolling. Okay, thank you. So we provide these quarterly updates to this committee just to keep you in tune with the things that we are moving forward based off the city council direction at the end of November 2020 and other things that we're working on since then. Of the original 17 items that the city council assigned, we are down to just 3 left to implement. They happen to be bigger things. So it's not for the lack of effort over time. I'll quickly go over those 3 and provide a few other updates for the committee and then take any questions, of course. And so on the first one, this is assignment C. And for the record, I'm on packet page 20, if you wanted to follow along. Work assignment C is after the implementation of our records management system, or RIMS, and the first data collection period, direct staff to resume annual data collection and analysis of the police contact data, similar to the previous stop data reports. This relates to the Racial Identity Profiling Act, or RIPA in short, and we are within that first data collection period of the year. So we can't technically check this item off before the year ends, but as staff, and I have Acting Assistant Chief April Wagner on as well, who can answer questions, but we are working on what the data reporting would look like after the end of this reporting period, as well as looking for an analysis partner to help us with actually the data over time with trying to better understand that data. So that's that update. And again, we have people here that can answer further questions. And then item K, assignment K, which is returned in the fall of 2021 with parameters, proposals, and strategies prior to engaging with the Palo Alto Peace Officers Association negotiations. So that update is the city's negotiators have received initial bargaining authority in closed session and are ready to begin the bargaining process. Throughout the process with the city's team. And the city's team and the department will continue to review and evaluate any provision which needs revision to align with the city's overall goals. And just as a reminder to the committee, this moved to this timeframe instead of 2021 because the contracts were all extended through this year. So that's part of why that time frame is a little different. And the last item is direct staff. This is assignment L. In coordination with the city's overall diversity and inclusion efforts to conduct a workforce demographic assessment as baseline information to pursue an employee assessment and measure city workforce culture. And so this one we've broken into a couple different parts. I'll provide all of the updates. We're continuing to work on the city's demographic information and we'll report back once that is done. So we're working on a dashboard as well as just a report out report. So we did an employee census update and we're working on being able to report out the data. The census update was just to allow employees the opportunity to update their information in case they've been working here for 20 years or 10 years or even 2 months. The information was filled out at the time of hire, and we wanted to provide employees an opportunity to reflect the identities as they see themselves today. The second part is we've done the board and commission demographic survey last year, and our goal is to do that regularly. So we'll be sending another one of those out. We're continuing to work on the citywide climate survey and hope to distribute it this year. We started working with a consulting group called Ivy Planning Group to help with an organizational assessment. They've started this work. Their organizational assessment will include focus groups. It'll include interviews with the city council members and our executive leadership team. Is really helping us and start to look at process within different departments for the city. It's helping us to be able to understand our overall climate and culture and how things are provided as services throughout our different departments. So we have an all hands meeting for staff on October 25th. Ivy Planning Group will be sort of having this kickoff discussion with the workforce that day. So, and partnership, of course, with City Manager Chicago. And we are working with Circle Up Education to do the board and commissions training and the city council, of course, on microaggressions. So we've had 2 of those 3 trainings. The next one is coming up, and we're working with Circle Up Education to schedule even another one. We've made sure that we didn't hit quorum for any of the commissioners that were involved in the city council. So there has been some additional excitement gathered around this, and we wanted to make another training session available. So we will send that information out. And we have started developing the materials for our equity and inclusion officials so that we have a staff person whose assignment is to keep all of these different initiatives rolling ongoing. So that's very exciting, especially for me, having a little bit more assistance as we go throughout. Other really brief updates, the related to mental health alternative response programs. The county's trust program, which you recall is their version of something like the Eugene, Oregon Cahoots program. They have awarded the contract to Momentum for Health to implement it in North County. And we are trying to see all the many different ways we can help them learn Palo Alto and be most successful up here. The boundary of the North County program has extended a little further south, I think, than they originally planned. It sounds like it's sort of Santa Clara and further north. And so we're really trying to make sure that Palo Alto is well represented and that they know our programs and our atmosphere up here and connected to our nonprofit partners. So those are conversations we're inserting ourselves into if we're invited or not. We are really just trying to make sure that this program is successful and people know how to use it up here. In terms of the city's PERT program, Psychiatric Emergency Response Team, that's been successful in the community, and Acting Assistant Chief Wagner has a small update on that program as well. I'll let her provide that in just one moment. And our federal earmark funding for an alternative mental health response program, we officially have the grant award. Apparently there's $2 million in the federal bank, and we're working on implementation related to that program. So just so we'll keep you up to speed as we go. Lastly, the Human Relations Commission had some assignments on this race and equity topic as well, related to the holidays. So they are preparing their report to the city council. You've acted upon one of them, which was the renaming of Columbus Day. They will be bringing back the recommendation related to the other holidays that you asked them to look at. They're also working on the AAPI history in Palo Alto. According to Ms. Vanderswag, they have started discussions on that, and they have another upcoming meeting, and they're narrowing their focus. So they're actively working on it. And lastly, related to hate crimes, they organized a meeting with the FBI a few weeks ago. The chairperson and another commissioner for the HRC met with about 20 FBI agents. It was a very interesting meeting to walk into a room with so many FBI staff, but they presented information about the type of work that they do and community engagement and things that will help them be able to better act on hate crimes and the partnerships that they need for that. So in collaboration with the HRC, they are working to put together some sort of public program in February. And as the information becomes available, we'll share it with this committee. Lastly, as Ms. Spencer mentioned, the CDOT ordinance staff is continuing to work on that, and we just have to keep it moving, I think is the long short of that. But I do want Ms. Spencer to know we have not forgotten about that recommendation. And that is high level. There's more information in the report, but that concludes our presentation. Acting Assistant Chief Wagner, if you wanted to provide a quick PERT update, and then we'll conclude.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. So our PERT program, as you guys know, was established in November of 2021. And I did want to give you just a few numbers on the effectiveness and the response of the team. So from November 2021 through September 2022, our team has responded, which is one officer and one clinician from the county, responded to 361 calls for service of mental health crisis, and has offered resources to another 246 people in our town. It's an active team. They've done fantastic work. I do regret to inform you, though, that our PERT program is experiencing some staffing changes for the clinician. And so we do have to locate a new clinician, but we are working very closely with the Santa Clara County Behavioral Health Services Department to find a replacement clinician as soon as possible. With all luck on our side, hopefully not more than several weeks till they can find us a replacement and then just stabilize in that staffing. They realize that we're very committed to this program and that we've had great success. And so they're definitely great partners in this. Are there any questions on that?
Or the rest of the report? We're all done. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And before we get to questions, let's see if there's any members of the public who'd like to address.
Chair Stone, we do not have any requests to speak.
All right, thank you. And we'll return to then the committee. Councilmember Cormack.
Following our usual order. Thank you, Chair Stone. Thank you for this update. So starting with C, and I'm glad to have, let me get all the words before Ms. Wagner. It's acting, interim, assistant, deputy, something. How many words? I'm missing a few of them. No, I actually want to know. So.
Captain Wagner is just fine. I'm the acting assistant police chief currently.
Acting assistant. I'm writing that down. I did say captain the other day and I was corrected by someone who is not here this evening. So, okay. Acting assistant chief, deputy chief. Acting assistant chief. Great.
Correct.
That's a lot of words. All right. Acting Assistant Chief Wagner, thank you so much for being here. We've had some back and forth in emails about the RIPA data and it being provided to the state, but we don't have it, and then having other formats of it. What exactly do we have available to us now? And so let's start with that, and then I'll have a second question.
Sure. What we have available to us now is at any day or time, we can request our data set from the Department of Justice directly, which is where our data is being submitted to and through. So we have captured about a 3-month data set that we grabbed to try to, if you recall from some number of months ago, we were talking about this, the data set is raw form and
Right.
It needs to be manipulated to be digested by the public. So we are still working with our IT department in trying to make sure we can get that raw data into a digestible form so that we can publish it directly on our website.
And how long do you anticipate that will take?
Well, the data set should be complete. It should be the annual data set. So in theory, we have to get all of our submissions in and approved from December 31st. And as soon as we have all of our data in, making sure everyone's got their submissions that have been reviewed and approved, we can start working on getting that data set ready to release to the public.
And do you have the resources you need to do the data analysis and presentation?
So there's two different things. You're talking data analysis, which is not at this moment, which we are planning on, but at first we have to start with getting the data in a digestible form. So we're anticipating doing two things, which is having the raw data set published for the public to consume in whichever form they'd like. And also trying to provide some base statistics for everyone to just give maybe a snapshot view of maybe some of the most important data sets or most ones that people would like to know the most. And just so you are aware, we are attending, the chief and I and a few other staff members. There's a November 1st summit on RIPA data from Cal Chiefs with some experts talking about best practices of trying to display that data and on the data analysis, as well as some reimbursement for the RIPA process and some of the costs that agencies have incurred trying to comply with it. So
Okay.
we'll get more information on some best practices and best first thoughts for this data display after that.
I hope our community takes a learning approach to this, that, you know, no one expects our first foray into this to be perfect. And I hope and expect the department is, going to continue to be transparent with the data that's available. So, we've been off to a bit of a rocky start on some of these issues. So I'm just going to say out loud that it would be great if, when everyone looks at the first draft, we consider it a first draft, and collectively we improve it as people want different cuts of the data or different explanations. So thanks for that, Acting Assistant Chief Wagner. Glad I wrote that down. Okay. Deputy City Manager Cotton Gaines. Well, that's 5. Okay. Now on to L. So, I'd be lying if I didn't say I was disappointed this has taken so long. It's so important. So I'm glad, that we've got someone on board to help, but I think it's taken a long time. So board commission demographics, this was always a little confusing to me. Are we supposed to be doing something with that? Like, that information was collected, but it's not like it's reshared by the clerk when we're doing interviews, or how should we be thinking about that data and how to use it going forward?
Thank you for the question, and also the feedback, well received. For the demographic information for staff or the board and commissions, it's baseline information. So how you use that in your decision-making is completely up to the city council. It's really for awareness is the reason for collecting it. You can't guess what you don't know or what you don't collect, and there hadn't been a process for collecting that information previously. If it's of interest to the city council as a whole, we can definitely work with the city clerk's office and make sure that's shared at those times that you are doing recruitments. And working with the city clerk, we want to align the collection period with when you either just appointed people or some point that is relevant in your board and commission appointments. I know there are sometimes someone steps down from a seat, but there is an otherwise cadence to it. And our goal is to make the information be useful to the city council. So we're working with the clerk's office on trying to align those timelines.
All right. And presumably this is something that our future equity and inclusion officer will help us think about how to use in a thoughtful manner.
Yes.
Okay.
Thoughtful definitely being the goal as opposed to anything punitive or anything of that sort. It's information that can be used for decision making.
Right. Okay. Well, as we have a brief moment to think about, when this all started and where we are now, it's hard for me to know the steps we need to take until and unless we see, what our workforce looks like and issues and concerns that they have, and until we get through the training. I guess my final question is, are all council members signed up for, and it looks like it's called Conscious Conversations. Is that what it's called? Is everyone signed up? I know we as a committee recommended that, or can you not share?
We do not have 100% of any board, commission, or the city council signed up for the 3 trainings. It has varied by commission. The Architectural Review Board is probably getting the best grade for most commissioners represented in a training. So I gave a kudos to the staff person as well as the commissioners. with organizing themselves and spreading across the trainings. We will have the ability to add some more training opportunities, but I do think it is still incumbent upon each body to encourage all the members to attend one of the trainings.
Okay, well, to that end, I think in the next update, I think it's just numbers, right? So I think having a table that says, here's how many members there are of each of these boards or commissions, here's how many have taken the training would be helpful. I can certainly imagine council member liaisons, taking the opportunity if they have had the training to encourage, the board or council, if that's appropriate. And I think if this is such an important priority, then it would be. So I would like to see that information shared in a neutral manner so that we can continue to demonstrate that it's important. It's not just an email that people got. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And on that, there has been a lot of positive feedback for those who have attended the training. So if anyone's listening and you haven't done one yet, I highly recommend. And Councilmember Tanaka was at one of them, so he can share.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, mine's pretty quick, but first of all, thank you guys for your work on this. How has the hate crimes in our city been trending, up or down? Or just maybe you could talk about that.
Acting Assistant Chief Wagner.
Hate crimes or incidents, either way.
Yeah, I apologize. I was not prepared to present statistics, local statistics or up-to-date statistics on this, but I certainly can get back to you on that.
Okay, I would appreciate it. Thank you. And then I know that we did a survey of the boards and commissions, and I think from the last survey, it showed that there's relatively few Asian Americans relative to the percentage of the population here. And how has the outreach been going in terms of recruiting? Maybe that's a question for the city clerk. I don't know. Can anyone speak to that?
We can get follow-up information from the city clerk to Councilmember Cormack's question of how to usefully use the information. I think this is one of those things, even for recruitment, of where we recruit and how we reach out to potential board and commission members. All of those type of things could be lessons learned for us if we see certain demographics and we always see those demographics over time and we are recruiting in the same place. Maybe there are opportunities to expand or tap into other networks in the community, but we can follow up with the city clerk's office and see if we can get you some additional information.
Thank you.
Great. For Acting Assistant Police Chief Wagner. There we go. So I wanted just a clarification if any members of the public listening in may have been concerned about your phrasing where you said that we need to on the stop data to manipulate the data in order to make it digestible for the public. Can you just explain what you meant by manipulate the data so it's digestible for the public? I can imagine some members of our public maybe being a little concerned about how that was phrased.
Yes, of course. Maybe that was not the best choice of terms. The data comes in a raw text form, which is not digestible because it's coded. And so we have to, one of our IT specialists with the city, thankfully, is able to work with that data to put it into a program where it can actually make sense to the reader. So that is the first thing that happens is because it's coded in a way, it will be digested into a way that actually makes sense with appropriate verbiage that someone can understand. I also do want to inform you that there are a few areas in the stop data which are not supposed to be released publicly. It's just officer identification numbers. An officer, I believe it's years of service, because the idea that DOJ clearly outlined in their regulation was that this was not supposed to be tied to any certain officer. Depending on the size of your agency, if you gave years of experience, you might be able to know exactly which officer had this data attributed to them. So those are just a couple categories that are removed and will not be made public.
Great, thank you. And then my next two questions, I think for Ms. Conn-Gaines, is there on the Circle Up training, is there the ability? I know other jurisdictions have done this not an opt-out, but basically the ability to be able to show that commissioner, board member, council member, whatever, has satisfied the requirements through a similar training, through work or another board.
We have not asked that question. So I think that that's a really good point, knowing a lot of people work for organizations that have focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion over these years, that this is something that they may have engaged with through some other organization. In asking folks if they want to do one of the makeup trainings, we can ask a question like that. Not everyone will respond. I do want to note that, and we're not doing necessarily intense tracking to the degree of if someone doesn't email back or even through their staff liaison, we may not get that information, but we can ask the question when saying these additional trainings are available. And also please let us know if you've done something like it before.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think
good
that
feedback.
would be helpful. I mean, I think these are the type of trainings that should be done yearly. I don't think it would be good enough for somebody to say, oh, I did that 5 years ago. But if they're doing it every year, like, I mean, for the school district, we have to conduct these trainings every year, and it's always absolutely worthwhile. And I think we should continue to do that. And can you remind us for assignment K regarding parameters and strategies for engaging with PAPOA, I don't recall what those parameters and strategies were.
So that one is one where just as the city's negotiations process is typically the conversations with human relations resources, got the wrong R, human resources team in closed session. So those are things that the city council would have defined and given the city's negotiators as guidance.
Okay. Thank you. And then I just think, just a thought, I think at some point it might be helpful. I don't know how staff might want to structure this, but maybe some sort of briefing, both for council and the public, almost to have like a side-by-side comparison of all the various mental health responses now being offered in Palo Alto and going to be. I mean, we got Trust, PERT, MCRT, and then the newly awarded federal funds, which seems to more mirror the Cahoots program in Oregon, I believe. It's a lot of great programs. I think it's gonna be really easy for people to get confused over which acronym is doing what. And also that would be able to help us better understand where are we having some overlap and maybe where there are still gaps in service that we need to fill or identify other programs. So if something can come in the next year, I think would be really helpful, especially as some of these other programs get underway.
Absolutely. That's a great suggestion. And also the contact information related to the different programs and how the 988 number overlaps and all those things. I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. I think that'd be helpful. I mean, these are programs that I've been championing and interested in for a long time now. And it's difficult for me to be able to even keep track of all this. So I'd imagine most members of the public are likely pretty lost on it. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. And was there no action on this, right? Okay, great. And no more discussion. Then wonderful. We will move on to future meetings and agendas.
Yes, I will start. And I believe Councilmember Cormack also has some feedback. So for the November agenda, we are working with the newly named city auditor to see if the 2 audit reports which were held before will be coming forward. So I anticipate some audit reports. I don't know the exact ones. Also, the city council protocols and procedures document, and we plan to bring that in both November and December and outline in November and more detail in December. And the new council member orientation, a high level overview of that. We plan to have a small item on that one, as well as the city council priorities discussion. Typically this committee has a discussion on that before it goes to the city council for retreat. So those are the items tentatively slated for November 3rd, which is a Thursday. Just a reminder, your meeting next month is not election night on the 8th, but has been moved up to November 3rd. And then December, there are some other items, but gives you a sense of what's coming.
Great, thank you. And Councilmember Cormack?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in on the status of the referral that Councilmember Stone and I did about the Neighborhood Ambassadors Program. I was on one of my my visits with a CSD group, and we were working with CARA, which is the grief support program that does peer-based consulting. And, one of the perennial problems they have is having people know about their services. So between that and thinking about, the town halls that are being organized and the electrification workshop, and I feel like just about every week there are things that would be great if, there were neighborhood ambassadors who could serve as this conduit of connection. So does staff have any thoughts on whether or not that can come back this year?
I will touch base with a staff and follow up with a committee, and we'll see what we can make happen.
Great. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else from staff then on this?
No, just a lot of work to come and some referrals we may have to carry over, but it's not for the lack of trying and some energy happening. So thank you.
Yes, and thank you to all the work staff's doing. It's been an impressive year so far, and thanks to the committee members as well. Then we are adjourned. Good night, everyone.